All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are diving headfirst into the world of property rights.
Ooh, property rights.
Yeah, and no, don't worry, we are not about to bore you with a bunch of legal jargon.
No way.
This is going to be way more interesting than you think. We're talking about the stuff that starts arguments, ignites legal battles, and even, defines who we are.
Yeah, it's true. Property rights, they touch, so many parts of our lives and in ways we don't even realize.
Exactly. And get this, we've got excerpts from this fascinating law textbook chapter, and believe me, it is packed with historical cases, surprising examples. Get ready to have your mind blown by this stuff.
Yeah, you're going to be surprised by how many different reasons, justifications we have for saying that someone owns something. Is it just because they were the first one there? Or because they, put in the work to improve it? Or is it just because the government says so? It's actually a lot more complicated than it seems.
Way more complicated. And speaking of complicated, things get really, really interesting when we look at the history of property rights here in America, especially when it comes to Native American land rights.
Yeah.
This case, Johnson versus Emmentosh, it really lays it all out there.
Johnson versus Emmentosh, huge case. Landmark case, 1823.
1823.
And it still has echoes today, especially when you think about, pipeline protests and indigenous land rights. Yeah. Essentially, it established that the U.S. government, that they had the power to extinguish Native American land claims, even if they came before the United States itself.
It's got heavy stuff when you really think about it. Yeah. Imagine your ancestors have lived on this land for centuries, and then suddenly someone just comes along and says, nope, it's ours now.
New sheriff in town.
Right. The court back then had to grapple with all these conflicting ideas, who discovered it, who was using it, what even counted as ownership back then.
Totally.
And sadly, power often just trumped fairness.
Yeah.
And, that tension that we're talking about, that's at the heart of almost every property dispute, even today.
It's true.
But, okay, enough of the history books for a sec. Let's bring things to the present.
Okay.
I'm talking about Barry Bonds' record-breaking 73rd home run baseball.
Oh, I remember this.
Oh, yeah. Popov versus Hayashi.
Popov versus Hayashi, yeah.
Chaos. Total chaos.
Tell me about it.
One guy almost caught it. The other guy, he ends up with it in the scrum.
It was a whole thing.
Talk about a property dispute for the ages, right?
It's a perfect example of just how messy this idea of possession can be.
Totally.
I mean, the judge actually ordered them to split the profits.
Really?
Which, it brings up this fascinating question. Does almost catching something count as possession?
Right.
Where do we even draw the line?
See, I told you this would be more interesting than you thought, right?
It is juicy.
And it's not just about baseballs.
No.
Remember that part in the chapter about, putting oysters in a common fishing ground?
Oh, yeah.
Whose oysters are those?
Right. That gets at this whole tension between the traditional, finders, keepers idea.
Right.
And the idea that if you put labor into something, that strengthens your claim. So do we reward the person who just stumbles upon something, or do we reward the person who actually puts in the effort to cultivate it?
Right.
Tough questions.
Okay, so speaking of finding things, this next case, this takes us back to the basics, 1805 basics.
Okay.
It all started with a fox and a very determined hunter.
I'm intrigued.
Can you set the scene for us?
All right, so picture this. Rural New York. Crisp autumn day, okay?
Right.
One man is chasing a fox, getting close to catching it, and all of a sudden another man appears, swoops in at the last second, and kills it.
Ooh.
So the question is, who gets the fox? That is what's at the heart of Pearson versus Post.
You would think it's pretty obvious, right? The guy who's chasing it.
You'd think so, yeah.
But this case established a very important legal principle, the rule of capture.
Ah, yes, the rule of capture.
So tell us more about this rule of capture.
So this rule basically says that you don't own a wild animal just because you're chasing it. You need to have actual possession.
So it's not enough to be on the chase. You gotta seal the deal.
You gotta catch it.
Snooze, you lose.
Exactly.
At least in the eyes of the law, right?
In the eyes of the law, that's right.
And this rule, this has had some major implications. I mean, we're not just talking about, hunting foxes here.
No, we're not.
We're talking oil, gas, mineral rights, all of that.
Big stuff.
All of it.
Huge implications.
Imagine you're drilling for oil on your property, but it turns out that oil actually migrated from under your neighbor's land.
Oh.
Who owns it?
Right. Cases like Elif versus Texan drilling, they've had to grapple with that exact question. And it goes right back to that idea of capture.
So a simple fox hunt leads to all of these other questions.
Exactly.
Wow, who knew? Okay, so we've covered possession.
Okay.
But what happens when you just, stumble upon something?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Enter the chimney sweep and his lucky, or maybe not so lucky find.
Okay.
All right.
Let's hear it.
It's that case, Armory versus Delamere.
Yeah.
A classic case of finders keepers.
Right.
Well, kind of. This case said that if you find something, you have a right to it.
Okay.
Except, of course, for the true
But
owner.
of course, yeah.
Makes sense, right?
It makes sense, but it gets a little murky when you find something on someone else's property.
Oh, tell me about it.
So, like, what if I'm digging in my backyard and I find a buried treasure chest?
Ooh.
Whose is that?
Is that mine because I dug it up?
That's the question.
Or is it my neighbor's? Because it's, like, technically on their property.
Right, and the textbook, this chapter, like, really goes into these crazy scenarios.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how important the original owner's intent is.
Oh, interesting.
Like, did they lose the item? Did they misplace it? Or did they just straight up abandon it?
Wow.
It gets complicated.
It really makes you think twice about all those lost and found bins. Yeah.
Right.
It's like, who actually owns that stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It reminds me of this crazy story. This is a true story. I read this. This guy, he finds this wad of cash
No.
hidden in, get this, in the wing of a plane.
What?
Hidden compartment in the wing of a plane. Full of cash. And he's like, jackpot. This is mine now. But then he ended up in this whole legal battle with the airline
Of course.
over who had the rights to the money.
Wow. That's wild.
And the crazy part is, like, these cases happen more often than you think.
They do.
It all comes down to whether they can find the original owner,
Right.
or if they can, like, figure out what their intention was.
Right. What they would wanted.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so tricky.
But, there's this whole other layer to this property rights thing
Okay.
that really struck a chord with me when I was reading this chapter.
Yeah.
It's the part about total institutions.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I have to admit, this section, like, totally caught me off guard.
It's heavy stuff.
Who knew that talking about property rights
Uh-huh.
would lead to a discussion about prisons
Right.
and mental hospitals?
Yeah.
Like, what?
It's easy to think about property as like this abstract thing, this abstract legal concept.
Right.
But then you look at these situations like prisons
Yeah.
and you see, people having everything taken away from them, all their belongings.
That's like stripping someone's identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Taking away their sense of self,
You're taking away their humanity almost.
And the chapter, like, connects that to homelessness, which is really powerful.
Yes.
Think about it. People living on the streets, they have to carry everything they own,
Yeah.
and then they get penalized for it.
Yeah, it's like they're damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Cities will confiscate their belongings, saying that they're abandoned just because someone is trying to, like, survive.
It's a system that often punishes people for being poor.
It's really heartbreaking
It is.
when you think about it. It makes you question, like, what does it really mean to have something, to own something?
It's true.
When, like, even the most basic necessities can be taken away from you so easily.
Absolutely. It challenges our whole notion of what ownership means.
Totally. So we've covered so much ground here. We've had historical cases, bizarre disputes, philosophical questions. Like, where does it all leave us? What does it all mean for the average person who's listening to this?
Right. That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to sort of tune this stuff out and think, well, property law, that's not really relevant to me.
Right.
But here's the thing. Property is everywhere.
It's true.
It's like the foundation of our economy.
Right.
It shapes how we interact socially.
Totally.
And it even influences how we see ourselves.
You're totally right.
Yeah. So, like, even if you don't realize it, these principles are at play in your life.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. It's like every time you hear a news story about, a land dispute or someone yelling finders keepers,
Right. Okay.
there's this whole, like, history of legal thought and philosophical debate behind it.
And now I can't unhear it.
Right.
I'm going to be thinking about this all the time.
That's what we're hoping for.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I'm going to be that person at a party. You're like, well, Pearson versus Post.
There you go. You'll be the life of the party.
Exactly. But in all seriousness, understanding these principles, even just having, like, a basic grasp of them,
Mm-hmm.
it can really empower you to navigate the world in a much more effective way.
100%. It's about being an informed citizen,
Right.
understanding your rights
Right.
and understanding the rights of others.
So whether you're renting an apartment, creating something new, or even just trying to understand the news, having this knowledge in your back pocket can be really, really valuable.
That's what this is all about.
It's been eye-opening for sure.
It's a wild ride.
I went into this thinking it was going to be all this like dry, boring legal stuff.
Right.
But it's so much deeper than that.
It is. It is. It's about history. It's about philosophy. It's even about psychology.
It's about humans.
It's about what it means to be human.
That's a great way to put it.
And it all comes down to this like really basic question. What does it truly mean to own something?
It's such a simple question.
It is.
But it's so loaded.
But the answer is anything but simple.
Anything but. And, that's what makes it all so fascinating to explore.
Exactly. And it's a conversation that's still going on today.
It's true. We're all part of this ongoing conversation.
We are.
Whether we realize it or not.
That's the beauty of it.
We've been focusing so much on physical objects.
Yeah, the tangible stuff.
Land, but what about the world of ideas?
Ah, yes. The intangible.
Do you really own an idea?
That's the $1 million question.
That's a whole other can of worms.
It is.
We're talking about intellectual property here.
Yeah.
Patents, copyrights, trademarks. It's like the legal framework that protects the creations of our minds.
Yeah.
But how do you even define ownership of an idea, of a song, of a logo?
Right.
It's crazy when you start to really think about it.
It's like, where do you even draw the line?
Exactly. And it just keeps evolving, especially in this digital age that we're living in.
Totally. The digital age throws a whole wrench into things.
Digital content, software, even like AI-generated art. It's like the wild, wild west out there.
It really is. We're making the rules up as we go.
Do you think, like, our current frameworks for property rights, are they even equipped to handle these new challenges?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure we have the answers yet.
It's almost like we need, like, property rights 2.0 to deal with all this new stuff.
Right, like a whole new set of rules for the digital age.
Yeah. I mean, who knows what the future holds? Maybe we'll be fighting over virtual land in the metaverse one day.
Who knows? It could happen.
Or arguing over who has the rights to our digital memories.
Stranger things have happened.
But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
The power of knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
It got me thinking.
I like it.
Throughout this whole deep dive,
Yeah.
we've uncovered some pretty mind-blowing cases and concepts.
We have.
But what I'm walking away with is not just the legal specifics, it's the framework. It's how to think about property in a completely different way.
Exactly. And that's the really valuable thing here.
Right.
It's not just about memorizing a bunch of laws. It's about shifting your perspective.
Totally. It's like you said before.
Yeah.
Property, it's everywhere.
It really is.
And now we can't unsee it.
It's like you've got this new lens, this new way of seeing the world.
Yes.
And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. It's true. It's like that feeling when you learn a new word.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly you see it everywhere.
Exactly. It's like that, but with property.
Exactly.
You're going to be spotting property issues left and right now.
I'm going to be like that meme with the guy in the conspiracy board, but instead of red string, it's going to be property law connecting everything.
Exactly. You've cracked the code.
Yeah.
But seriously.
Okay.
This deep dive has been incredible.
It has.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me, and hopefully for everyone listening,
Yeah.
is that property rights, they're not just these dusty old laws that are stuck in the past.
It's very much Hawaiian.
They're a reflection of our values.
Our history and the kind of society that we want to create.
It's about who we are as a society.
Exactly. It's funny, we always think of property as this like tangible thing.
Right, like stuff.
Yeah. Houses, cars.
Your vintage record player.
Exactly. A vintage record player. But as we've been talking about property rights.
Yeah.
It's clear that like ownership goes way beyond these physical objects.
It really does. This whole deep dive has me thinking about like the stuff you can't touch.
Ooh, okay.
Like the chapter mentioned it briefly, but data privacy, online identities,
right.
Even controlling your own image online. These are all property rights issues too.
It's like a whole other frontier of ownership.
It really is. It's like the Wild West out there.
Makes you wonder, like in the future, are we going to be fighting over virtual land in the metaverse?
Oh, absolutely.
Or like who has the rights to our digital memories?
Right. It's like, can you imagine inheriting your great grandmother's Instagram? What does that even mean?
It's a lot. Okay, so before we go fully down that rabbit hole, I want to circle back to something you said earlier
Okay.
about the power of knowledge.
Yes.
Because it got me thinking, like, throughout this whole deep dive, we've uncovered some truly wild cases and concepts.
We really have.
And what I'm really taking away from this, it's not just the legal stuff.
Yeah.
It's like this new way of thinking about property.
Exactly.
I feel like I've got a whole new lens for viewing the world.
That's what we were hoping for.
Seriously, like, next time I hear a news story about, like, a land dispute or someone's out there yelling finders keepers,
Right.
I'm going to have this whole other layer of understanding.
You can be like, hold on, let's unpack this.
Exactly. Because, like you said before, property is everywhere.
It never goes away.
And thanks to this deep dive, we can't unsee it.
And that's a good thing. Because that awareness, that's where it starts.
Right.
That's what allows us to ask those critical questions to challenge assumptions.
And hopefully to create a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. That's the dream.
So to everyone listening, if you only remember one thing from this whole deep dive, let it be this. Property rights. They're not just these, like, dusty old laws.
No.
They are a reflection of our values, our history, and ultimately the kind of society we want to build.
We all have a stake in this.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, that's it for this deep dive into the world of property rights. It has. Until next time, keep those brain cells firing and keep asking questions.
And we'll keep digging deeper.